a preacher named Charles McCoy was the pastor of a Baptist church in Oyster Bay, New York, when at the age of 72, he was mandated by his denomination to retire. A lifelong bachelor, he earned 7 university degrees, including 2 PhDs from Dartmouth and Columbia. But still, he was forced out because he was considered to be too old. Though depressed, a week later, he was reacquainted with a Christian pastor from India who, on an impulse, asked him to preach in his church in the city formerly known as Bombay, which is now called Mumbai. In preparation, McCoy sold or gave away most of his belongings, put what was left in a trunk, and booked a one-way passage to India for his first trip outside of the United States. When he got there, he discovered that his wallet and passport and even his trunk had all been stolen. So with only the clothes on his back, he asked for directions to the home of his host. He got on a bus and headed for the house. Unfortunately, even though that pastor had promised a reception, a place to stay, the host was not expecting him. What was McCoy to do now? He had left it all to come and preach. He decided that he would try to make an appointment to preach for the mayor. After all, what did he have to lose? McCoy set out for the mayor's office the next day, and when the mayor's secretary gave him McCoy's business card listing all of those degrees, well, the mayor thought McCoy must not be merely a Christian pastor, but someone much more important. Not only did he get an audience with that mayor, but the mayor held a tea in his honor, inviting many of the city's prominent officials to come and join them. Among the attendees was the director of what might be India's West Point, the National Defense Academy. That director was so impressed with what he had heard that he invited McCoy to come and preach to his students as well. And thus was launched at the age of 72, a brand new 16-year ministry for Dr. Charles McCoy. Before he died at the age of 88, this dauntless old man circled the globe, preaching the gospel. There's a church in Calcutta today because of his preaching, and a thriving band of Christians in Hong Kong that were cultivated through his faithful ministry. Despite these successes, he never had more than enough money to get him to the next place he needed to go. It occurs to me that when working with God, success comes in many different forms. Often there's a cost. Not everything that we expect to come to pass will. All too easily, the assumption that life will go in one direction only means finding oneself on a different path altogether. As one friend notes, if you want to make God laugh, then just tell God your plans. I'll leave it up to you to judge whether it's true that opposites attract. However, when it comes to humor, I often find that the funniest parts of life are when differences collide, as one assumption becomes interrupted by another. And when the unexpected comes, sometimes we just have to laugh. In reading our Genesis story this morning, we see the Bible has its humor here for us as well. Sarah knew all too well that being a woman of her age means that she has come into a time of looking back on her life. Never would a woman at this place in life consider this to be an opportunity to become a first-time parent. She wasn't able to have children when she was younger, and so begins an inevitable impossibility in this morning's story. 3 visitors come. Custom dictates hospitality. Abraham, who's already 100 years old himself, becomes the gracious host. He welcomes, he bows, he washes their feet. He kills the fatted calf for their meal. And in return, the visitors give a blessing to Abraham. A common blessing is an act of gratitude, a blessing for health, a blessing for peace, a blessing for prosperity. Would have all been in order after receiving such a welcome. But the blessing that they give to Abraham is a blessing of fulfillment of a promise made by the Lord so many years ago. The blessing provided by these three travelers is for a son, an heir, a tie between Abraham and his wife Sarah, a progenitor to carry the family line forward. And yet there's a catch. A young child will come to the elderly Sarah. And so when the unexpected comes, sometimes we just have to laugh as we see that God's story has its humor as well. It's easy to imagine that somewhere between biting her tongue and twisting her fingers to contain the sound coming out of her mouth, she lets a noise out as she laughs. It could have been a whimper or a cackle. She could have flubbed her lips or shed a few tears. No matter, as hard as she tried, Sarah couldn't choke the laugh back into her body. Why would anyone think that she would have a baby at the age of 90? It's too funny to be true. How could such humor also contain such hope? We laugh when things don't make sense. It's okay to laugh when suggesting that the impossible become possible. Laughter comes in moments of disbelief, and so we laugh with Sarah. We laugh along with Sarah's laugh. We laugh because even as we are aware of God's blessing, we do not believe at first that the possibility of that blessing given to Sarah is true. They laugh, Sarah and Abraham together, because they've already accepted their place in life. The blessing for an elderly Sarah is unexpected, and sometimes we just have to laugh when we see God's story that has its humor as well. In response, the Lord's question to Abraham asks, "Is there anything too wonderful for the Lord?" What do you think? It's difficult to imagine. Is the Lord's question meant as hyperbole? Or is God's power impossibly wonderful? Can the Lord do this for Sarah and Abraham? Well, can the Lord make the blind walk again? Make the lame walk again? Or allow the blind to see? Can the Lord lift up the weak and tear down the strong? Can the Lord provide justice to the powerless and bring accountability to injustice? Can the Lord make the last become first and the first become last, as the sinful are forgiven their sins and life even conquers death? The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr once commented on humor and faith by associating humor as being a prelude to faith. What he means to say is that when we find incongruity, when we see how life does not match up with the way it is expected, we also find courageous moments leading us to trust in God. We laugh at the impossibility, only to be invited to believe that with God all things are possible. And in considering that deeply perplexing question comes a fundamental transformation as faith takes over, following God's leading to become the purpose of the believer's life. And so we laugh in the disbelief, and then we laugh with joy because you already know the answer. Is there anything too wonderful for the Lord? It occurs to me, though, that even as we know how to respond to God's ability, we also hold closer to our experiences. The Lutheran Edmund Steinle was a great preacher and teacher of preaching in the last generation. Commenting on God's surprises, he says, "At my age, the promise of newness every morning is at best a mixed blessing. I've come to the point in my life when I don't want anything new in the morning. I want my slippers right beneath my bed where I left them the night before. I want my orange juice and bran flakes for breakfast as normal. At my age, I can do without a lot of newness, especially in the morning." So the question does not so much ask, what can God do, but rather, how are we willing to look for the Lord's actions according to the faith within our own lives? The moment of faith means trusting that as we walk step after step along God's path, as your life and mine meet God in the surprises, hopefully, laughing a little bit along the way, we will follow the paths that God has prepared for us already. Pastor John Buchanan asks us to remember that the Bible is full of surprises from beginning to end. An old couple having a child, the old promise renewed, a God who comes quietly, steadily, to be with them, to bind up their wounds, to strengthen their hearts and arms and legs, a God for whom nothing is too wonderful. Christianity is about a God of surprises. What, after all, could be more surprising than a God coming into the world in the birth of a child? Another child. This child born of humble parents in an insignificant village called Bethlehem. What could be more surprising than that? So as we look to God, expect some surprises. Though they will never be what we expect, that's the surprise. And yet by faith we go on to love, to serve, and to walk humbly with our God.